The danger in all of that too is like there's a potential for more fatigue as well. I mean, I think what we've seen, and now we get a lot of feedback on, you may have experienced this yourself, is that now that I'm working from home and my calendar really has a much bigger impact on my day than before. And you realize like, oh, I need to go get a glass of water. I need to get up and stretch. I need to do this or that. And so addressing the needs of people who are, always connected, always working, and not and make it more than just the drudgery of the next meeting, right?
I'm Jack Newton, CEO of Clio, and this is the Daily Matters podcast. On Daily Matters, we talk with legal professionals, industry leaders, and subject matter experts about the future of law. We explore where the legal industry is headed, how legal practice is changing, and what you can be doing to position yourself for success. Today's guest is Stephen Abrahams, who works on partnerships for Microsoft Teams, a communication and collaboration platform which integrates with Microsoft Office 365. Stephen, thanks for being here, and I'm excited for our conversation today.
Hi, Jack. Thanks for having me on the podcast. It's been great working with your team and getting to know Clio a little bit better.
Yeah, and I'm so excited to talk about what we built together in a few moments. But first, I'd love to hear from you. What is on your mind most right now?
Oh, gosh. Well, it is a really trying time for everybody. I guess being a product manager, I would boil it down to two things. In my everyday life, like most people, I'm thinking a lot about how, my actions are directly or indirectly impacting society, and how, we can make a difference right now. Spending a lot of time with my children, obviously. I'm amazed at their kind of ability to grasp what's going on really today. I think they are a lot more aware of the contradictions and the things that are impacting the world right now than I was at their age. I think they understand a lot of the concepts around equity better than many adults, frankly. I've been impressed by that. I would say in my job, I spent a lot of time thinking about just the future of how people will work, how they're living right now and working all in the same place. I'm trying to see how we emerge from this. I think in the past, the forces of design and innovation have created new opportunities out of crises. So I'm excited to see how our partners are thinking about that too as we move forward.
So Stephen, tell us a little bit more about your role at Microsoft. You mentioned you're a product manager by trade. You head up partnerships for Microsoft Teams as well. Tell us about the role you play on a day-to-day basis at Microsoft.
Yeah, I'm chartered with taking care of our partners that are in regulated industries, so healthcare and legal and government, financial services. But I also spend a lot of time with our education partners. Education is a big segment for Office 365, for Teams. So I get to work with software developers and independent software vendors that want to work their software into our platform or want to leverage our APIs in their platform. So it's really a great job. I've held many roles at Microsoft. I've been here 15 years. I've worked on every communications platform app that Microsoft has shipped, going back to like MSN Messenger, even Skype, now Teams for the last 2 years. It's been exciting to be on Teams, and we've seen, of course, a lot of growth during the COVID period. And my focus has been really during that time on making sure that our healthcare partners, that our ED partners, that our legal partners that want to leverage Teams as a platform for virtual consults, virtual classroom, telemedicine, that they're enabled to do so.
So, Stephen, I'd love it if you could, for some of our listeners that may not be familiar with Microsoft Teams, and I think it's a product that the legal industry especially is still learning about in terms of what its capabilities are, even the fact it exists overall. Can you give us the elevator pitch for what Microsoft Teams is and why you might want to consider adopting it at your law firm?
Great question. Yeah, I mean, Teams really has many aspects to it, but the ones that people hire Teams for are secure chat, modern meetings, calling, the workflows that enable both them to use Office 365 apps like Word and Excel, and now the apps of our partners too. I like to think about Teams as a very connected, modern workspace. So it comes as part of Office. It's, of course, software for organizations of different types. So we have, all sorts of segments using, like I said, from education, healthcare, doctors, and, first-line workers, people who are managing sales organizations, marketing firms, ad agencies. It's really about creating open lines of communications using chat and channel conversations. So over 500,000 organizations are using it pretty much every day as their kind of their hub for collaboration, for having meetings, and sharing, communicating, getting their work done. So, you can break out into meetings and you can use channels to come together over common goals, make decisions. We really have seen that companies use Teams as a way of creating that culture of collaboration, information dissemination, transparency within the enterprise, certainly.
And what's the answer to the question of, you might hear from folks that say, well, that sounds like what email does for my organization. Why would they think about something like Microsoft Teams either as something that runs adjacent to, or maybe that they even consider as a pseudo replacement for email?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't invent Teams to replace email. I think it augments email. In fact, more and more we are doing things to make it easier to bring email conversations and essentially the to line of the email into a channel in Teams. So I think there's room for both. There's room for an app where I know I can go and find all the files, documents, and people, and that's really what Teams is about. Is that it's kind of that it's that network, it's that professional network of everybody you need to get your job done. And we see people starting to use that really to connect not just their internal network, but also their external network. So in the past, where you might have quickly sent off an email to somebody outside your network, if you have a question for them, you can actually invite them into Teams as a guest and get a quick feedback, quick decision made. And so I think it is somewhat about like, how do you move your business a little bit faster? How do you achieve things more efficiently? And how do you create sort of that single hub for collaboration?
And you've touched on this already with your reference to email and being able to pull an email subject line and start a new channel or discussion about that email in particular. Can you talk about how Teams integrates with other parts of Office 365? And again, it might be useful just to level set on what is Microsoft Office 365 for those that might just be used to the old on-premise versions of Microsoft Office. What is 365 and how does Teams integrate in with the rest of that suite?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think most of us started out using Word, Excel, PowerPoint, through installed apps on the desktop, and maybe you would buy Office. Today, what we see the vast majority of people doing is, yes, you're using those desktop apps, but you really are connected into a whole cloud service of apps and services from Microsoft. That does also include Word, Excel, PowerPoint, but also a broad range of services around document management, around looking at the kind of the graph of information, calendars, Outlook, email, Exchange, content. And so that's really what Office 365 does.
Mm-hmm.
It provides kind of a base level amount of enterprise security, compliance, files, documents, that graph of people I was mentioning. It allows you to create groups and organize content around those groups. And so with Teams, what we've done is sort of exploit all of that connectivity in a single hub. So Teams has native integrations with all of many of the Office apps. So you can share and work on a Word document without leaving Teams. I can see who else is editing it. I can quickly comment or create a chat or a conversation around a file that we're working on together in Teams. And it just is a lot seamless from the standpoint of moving in and out of documents. I don't have to think about where things are saved. Everything just kind of gravitates and snaps to that channel that I'm working on it. When you create that team, it also creates an Office 365 group, a SharePoint site, a document library where you can share files. You have a shared mailbox, even an Outlook email address that you can use, and a calendar for the team. So there's kind of a whole set of features that come with a team. Even you can use like a OneNote notebook for that team. And then those are then accessible to everyone on the team. So your reference point from that point onward is, I just need to add this person to the team, and then they gain access to all of these services and tools.
So this idea of essentially helping teams work better seems, maybe not surprisingly, central to what Microsoft Teams is trying to do. And I'd love to talk about two things that are interrelated. Maybe one, how you see this applying to lawyers and law firms in general. Where are you seeing adoption of Teams in general? And then when we cast it against the backdrop of the COVID-19 pandemic, the way that almost every organization has been forced into a mode of working in a highly distributed way, how does Teams help enable that work? And maybe what kind of spike in demand and adoption have you seen as a result of COVID-19? So let's tackle the first part of that question and talk about Teams in a legal context to start. Would love to explore your perspective on how law firms in particular can benefit from Microsoft Teams and what kind of use cases you've seen embraced by law firms to this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think fundamentally lawyers need to be able to communicate and collaborate well within the boundaries of the firm itself. But kind of the success of the practice ultimately depends on their ability to seamlessly move between, secure communication spaces to bring in clients, outside attorneys, paralegal, other resources that will help them get their job done. So, I think how we've been thinking about with Teams is it becomes that collaboration powerhouse for the law firm. It really excels at being the hub for those types of organizational activities. We know that, attorneys need to move faster. We know that just forms of communications like email sometimes have an asynchronous nature to it. It takes longer to get things done. We also know that attorneys are moving in and out of many different apps, and that like every time that you have to, enter identity or authenticate, toggle between services, if you can simplify that, if you can normalize a lot of those views, you can remove a lot of the management of the files and again, provide quick access to the set of people that are necessary to get the work done. You're giving everybody time back in their day. And everybody wants that because it makes them better at their job. So if I don't have to focus on creating a document workspace, it is just there for me. I can just focus on the content and really put my attention on my clients. I think that's where we'll see a lot of benefit early on from law firms that are using Teams.
It sounds like so much of what you're trying to do is eliminate that context switching and that cognitive burden that comes along with switching platforms and thinking about where did I store that file and so on. You just got one integrated workplace for thinking about where your work is.
That's it exactly. I think as we move more and more towards a paperless, um, digital world for all sorts of contractual obligations, all sorts of things like depositions and evidentiary gathering. More and more, you'll see um, uh, the the types of businesses that have specialized there, leveraging Teams infrastructure, leveraging Microsoft's network to build out and round out the edges of these collaboration spaces, essentially add in the services that attorneys will need. We've seen, you mentioned COVID earlier, and I want to come back to that. Our own law department at Microsoft, of course, extensively uses Teams, and they're using it to organize all sorts of different legal functions, contract reviews, legal matters. They organize discussions around data privacy. What are some of the other things? Employment law, intellectual property. They're really maxing out Teams and channels in Teams to have these discussions, to pin content, to add in the apps they need in each space. They're using Teams to bring in business partners. Really, that helps promote a better flow of information to share knowledge. Legal training. What are some of the other scenarios? I think it's really about giving people quick access to information that otherwise they would have maybe attached in an email and sent over, and then whether or not you're looking at the most recent version of that or an up-to-date version of that was always in question. So we know of course our own law firms, but other law firms were already using Teams when COVID hit, and consequently it made it very simple for them to move to remote work. I mean, the fact that they were now leveraging the same set of services from their couch instead of from their desk at work really didn't matter from the standpoint of the accessibility to the content, the availability of the network. And I think they were able to maintain a really high service level with their clients, because it does give you the ability to work from anywhere. If you had your laptop, you were ready to go. In terms of the new adoption we saw during this period,
Yeah.
coming on, I mean, really across the board, and this is a credit to folks like yourselves and the customers that you serve, is that you started to see how potentially Teams and meetings and the notion of these workspaces could really help our customers move to the cloud a lot faster. And I've heard many stories of firms that will use Teams initially to drive up sort of just efficient collaboration between the attorneys, right, and associates, while still kind of maintaining email with external clients. I think when everybody moved to the cloud, everybody discovered the notion of the guest, right? And all of a sudden they were creating teams with guests in them, and like wow, here's this is the new pattern, this is the new way of working. And they could have done that before, but there was something about that moment, about when we were all working remotely, where it's kind of let's create a new space for us. Let's create a culture where we have a higher level of connection between us, where we're able to more seamlessly share stuff and get more stuff done in a shorter period of time. So we have seen a lot more adoption of Teams, of Azure, of a lot of our services since COVID began. And I think it's because people took this opportunity to look at how they were doing things and said, this can be done more efficiently. This can be done in a more transparent, open way. And let's create a culture so that, all of the people in my company can work this way.
At Clio, we've talked about this concept in legal, especially, but I think it applies to so many businesses. This idea that there's been an evacuation to the cloud, that many law firms, many businesses maybe weren't using the cloud to its full extent, and even if they were leveraging cloud services, we're not operating in this highly distributed work from home world that we're in. So, we've seen at Clio an explosion in adoption over the last 2 or 3 months. I'm curious to hear, are there any concrete stats you're able to share just in terms of the volume that Microsoft Teams has seen increase over the course of the COVID crisis?
Oh, in a period of months, we saw two very interesting stats that I can talk about. One is just the number of daily unique participants in meetings exploded, and we didn't previously release stats on that, but this was a number that went up to 200 million in a day.
Wow.
And so if you can imagine the amount of load on the services, and it's very exciting as a product manager to see that much growth, but if you're in operations, that's like your worst nightmare.
Right. Yeah. You're popping champagne and they're panicking about the load your servers are being placed under.
Now, those are participants in meetings, so they're not all like regular everyday users, right? But it gives you a sense of just kind of the importance of the meeting and the flight to Teams as a place where we can do all sorts of types of real-time activities together. I think the other one that was really interesting from our standpoint was the number of daily active users. So these are the real, like, everyday Teams type, we depend on this for getting work done type. That went from in February, we announced 44 million daily active users to 75 million at the end of April.
Wow.
And so that's a big jump for any business to experience. And that really, now you're not talking about just meetings, you're really talking about everything plus meetings. You're talking about collaboration, you're talking about document sharing, you're talking about teams and channels, and people really digging in on the core things that the product does. And so that was very internally very exciting for us. Definitely the segments of users, I would say, remained about the same proportion, but we saw some of them really take off. Obviously, in healthcare and education, we saw a lot of just immediate demand in those areas. Doctors were using Teams to have, do triage of COVID patients without having to take off a PPE. Of course, we saw teachers using Teams now to set up their virtual classroom every day. And so, we saw a lot of those ratios that we look for around kind of the viral quotient of how many users to Teams, how many teams to organizations changed quite a bit during that period as well. So really exciting. Definitely, I don't think anybody would have wanted that to happen over such a short period of time, but it's nice to see that the technology really does scale. And I think that's a credit to the people who built it, and that it's able to scale to, overnight. An entire university in Bologna, Italy came online, 80,000, new students, the next day are all firing up Teams and using it to communicate with each other. So yeah, there's some exciting stories there.
Yeah, I think it's a silver lining of the COVID pandemic, if we can frame it that way, of so much technological change, maybe a decade or more of adoption really being accelerated into 2 or 3 months of time, which if you can take the load, from a technological perspective, it's unbelievably exciting to see that level of acceleration. And we get to live in a future that might have taken years or a decade or more to have arrived otherwise. one of the I'm curious, while we're still talking about adoption and some of the core workflows that Microsoft Teams facilitates, um, can you tell us some of the things you hear from customers on a firsthand basis, either customers in general, or maybe if you've heard feedback from law firms just about the types of ways that it's changed how they work, or that they think about the way that we work, even in a distributed way?
Yeah, I would say there's a couple things that I hear frequently. One is, you know, um, attorneys, particularly, everybody to some degree, but attorneys particularly, I think, have a lot of interest in and concern over data privacy, on data security,
Yeah.
whether who has access to um, uh, content and conversations. And so one of the frequent things that we hear when organizations start using Teams is that since we enforce this team-wide and organizational-wide two-factor auth, we have single sign-on through Active Directory, there's encryption of conversations in transit, or when they're at rest, that it's kind of this load off their mind. They're now like, I can feel like, I can trust my conversations, the files, the documentation, the thing that my client just said is secure. And I think there is an expectation there with Microsoft and with Office 365 that you're getting this enterprise grade cloud solution, you're getting advanced security, you're getting compliance, you're getting all these capabilities that law firms and in-house legal groups expect. And I think it just kind of builds on from there. I mean, we have asks that they're interested in other things around information boundaries, conditional access to services. So it's really interesting working with attorneys, because I think they're some of the lead users of Teams in some extent. They're pushing us the hardest to come up with different compliance services. In many cases, organizations need to be able to protect themselves from lawsuits stemming from, it may be an employee taking retribution, or gender discrimination, or hate speech being used. And so Teams is starting to provide more of these APIs for compliance services, for data loss protection, to make sure that there's the auditing and reporting that is available. If somebody's under a retention policy, we have a compliance recording bots that can capture all the conversation, can keep everybody aware of the conversations that are going on in many different types of contexts. So yeah, I think, like I said, I think the both in legal and in healthcare, we get some of our most fervent and lead users driving the feature set, our backlog, if you will, for what we do. As I'm sure you do, like we have an advisory panel of customers who are on the ground, that are helping us prioritize, that are helping us think through what are the things that are going to move their businesses forward, what are the most critical. And that's one of the great things I get to do, is spend a lot of time with these customers and hear about their, kind of what their next year looks like, and where they think Office and Teams can help the most.
Stephen, one item you touched on, I think that is super interesting, is the fact you work with these regulated industries that have traditionally been maybe a bit more resistant to change, and we've seen the forcing factor of COVID-19 really force so many of these organizations into a brand new world where they're doing remote work, they're operating and collaborating with each other internally and clients externally in a brand new way. I'm curious what struggles you've seen some of your customers experience on that front, and conversely, what successes you've seen, and maybe what patterns or best or next practices might extract from the on the ground lessons that you're seeing your customers learn about this new way of working, and what teams might facilitate in terms of being able to get over some of the challenges of this distributed way of working.
Yeah, great question. I think, I don't think any of us were adequately mentally prepared for that sudden transition to remote work. But you certainly saw certain industries flex faster than others.
Mm-hmm.
And for them, I think it was more of a blip than a rethink of how they're going to do business. For the ones that came on that were new, that were kind of discovering for this for the first time, for instance, in healthcare, you saw, there was telemedicine going on, but not every doctor was doing telemedicine. When COVID hit, every doctor woke up the next morning and said, I'm doing telemedicine. So they had
Right.
to do a lot of this thinking for the very first time. And, I think when you use a tool that's naturally about organizing people and conversations together, and people can kind of take that first step, and the first step's always the hardest, of course, but we see the learning ramp be like, in 2 weeks you've been using Teams, and you're not going back to whatever the thing was that you were doing before. And in 4 weeks, we see people starting to use more apps, and being comfortable in kind of inviting people into conversations, creating channels around specific things they want to do. So it really builds on itself. And like I said, it creates that culture of transparency, of openness within the team. And people realize that, now I can search through lots of conversations that are going on, even out of my direct purview, and have access to an incredible amount of information and resources from that. Like I said, with all these different segments, hospitals will be deploying teams to EMTs, to ER doctors who are working on front lines of medical care. We've seen a lot of growth there. We've seen growth, with, in financial services. You have traders working at home, trading from home. And so there needs to be a lot of content services and research and call types happens, and everybody is on the same page and goes off, and everybody's pretty much communicating asynchronously, coming back together for meetings throughout the day. And so Teams does create that gravitational force for everybody, and you can see dozens of other people. So you really have the notion of when people are online. The danger in all that too is like there's a potential for more fatigue as well. I mean, I think what we've seen, and now we get a lot of feedback on, you may have experienced this yourself, is that now that I'm working from home, and my calendar really has a much bigger impact on my day than before, and I'm just much more accessible, and so my day kind of like starts to stack up with these meetings. And you realize like, oh, I need to go get a glass of water. I need to get up and stretch. I need to do this or that. And so, a lot of our partners are thinking about how do they start to even think that kind of like, I wouldn't call it work life. I would call it sort of micro breaks, and sort of like addressing the needs of people who are, always connected, always working, and not, and make it more than just the drudgery of the next meeting, right? And so I think Teams allows you to kind of like have those channels to have the water cooler channel, have the the place where you can go and kind of talk about the sports scores if you want, if you're
Right.
your company is, or if you want to meet up for 15 minutes and have kind of a like a team lunch, side channel where you're not talking about work. It kind of allows you to transition more naturally between those modes, and I think people really appreciate that.
One topic I'd love to segue into, Stephen, is talking about something you've touched on lightly over the course of our conversation, but you've talked about the concept of integrations and how that provides a lot of value to Microsoft Teams customers. I'd love for you to talk about integrations in general, what that means, and how that translates into making Teams as a platform more valuable. And in particular, I'm excited to hear more about the Clio integration. So our company has announced a really exciting integration between Microsoft Teams and Clio. And we've seen an enormous initial response from our customers and some great feedback on what they'd like to see next from this integration as well. So would love to start just hearing, what are integrations and how do they work with Teams? And let's talk about the Clio integration in particular and what that means for your law firm customers.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about integrations, particularly with teams such as yourselves, it's really about how we can marry two products, two services together and produce something that's new. What we don't want to do is just, kind of regurgitate the same offering just on another platform. And so I think what we're trying to do is look for gaps in the existing offering, opportunities to innovate, opportunities to drive up productivity. Certainly, we were really excited to work with you guys. I mean, I think the leadership and just sort of the view that you have into the life and day of the small law firm and the attorney gives us pretty much the ideal partner to work with. I mean, this is an industry where clearly we can see significant upside for collaboration tools to drive down the cost of providing services and to drive up, and thus the client satisfaction. But, where it was really exciting to see was how, at some level, we were able to map these constructs that are in Clio today into the same constructs and teams. And so if you think about the notion of a group of attorneys, they will have maybe some paralegals, they'll have a client, and so you have this notion of the group. And then you can start to mirror some of these things that are in Clio over into Teams. You can pull through legal matters. You can, really see how, much of the taxonomy, much of the types of communications, and absolutely, of course, the documentation and all the workspace that's needed can now have a shared experience, and you get the best of the Clio services plus Teams for communications and collaboration. And I think it's a 1 + 1 = 3 type thing, or maybe 4 or 5. I don't know. But it to me, the combination of the two products together is sort of what we're shooting for when we talk about integrations with Teams. Now through your integration, you can create this team for a legal matter. You can bring the conversation to the experts and the people most qualified to drive those tasks to completion. If I'm living in Teams or if I'm living in Clio, it doesn't matter. We bring, we're kind of coming to you. So, it also, of course, being in Teams gives you access to all those other tools and services that attorneys are using, document workspaces and Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, and all the tools that you need. We even see some, people creating their own apps in Teams. We have low code or no code tools for them to automate some of their workflows. And then they can publish those to just that team or to that organization. And so that's exciting too, because those are basically, again, like I say, really rounding out the edges of what the core platform is extensible to, but doesn't provide out of the box.
And a core piece of these integrations as well is eliminating duplicate data entry. You don't need to set up a group in Microsoft Teams and a group in Clio or a user in both systems. You've got this unified view of who the people in your organization are. You've got, if you create a matter in Clio, you can automatically create the matching channel in Microsoft Teams that allows you to have this more dynamic discussion about what's going on with a matter through the workday. You talked about low code and no code tools, and I think that's a really interesting concept, but one that's probably new for many of our listeners. Can you briefly touch on what you mean by that, and what some of the tools that Microsoft provides to support that kind of work?
Yeah, there's a whole group of tools from Microsoft called Power Automate, and you can think of these as kind of like stringing little tasks together. So let's say you had a common workflow, like in order for me to negotiate with a partner, I need to get sign off from 3 stakeholders. And there's somebody in accounting or finance, or there's 2 or 3 people that are involved. You could actually essentially initiate those workflows with our tools. But once you've done it once, like how do I make this so that anybody could go use this? How can I publish this workflow? So that's really what I'm talking about with these low code or no code solutions for those everyday workflows. If there are things that you're doing over and over and over, and you realize, well, there should be an easier way. Likely there's a no code or a low code way you can do that with Power Automate, where there's events that trigger particular types of communications that can be sent. You can, of course, use the power of teams and channels and teams to kind of target those at specific people. You can also set thresholds, and it really builds on itself. So the more that you're willing to invest time into thinking about those workflows, the more powerful they can become. But yeah, we've tried to make that as simple as possible for pretty much anybody. And there's a ton of documentation and samples online too. If you want to just try them out, you can download a sample, sort of customize it for your own organization, try it with a couple of people, and before you know it, you'll be creating your own workflows. It's really kind of fun.
Yeah, I think it's especially relevant for law firms that are often tackling the same kind of matters and the same kind of checklist or workflow that needs to be worked through. So being able to encode that and make it a repeatable process can help make a law firm a whole lot more efficient. And maybe on the note of helping law firms collaborate, help them operate more efficiently, can you give me a high level perspective from your vantage point, Stephen, on what you think the opportunity is for technology to really transform the legal industry, and what kinds of opportunities you see for law firms, maybe even improving access to justice through the adoption of technology?
Oh, I mean, really so much. I mean, I think, again, moving to a paperless world, I think from the standpoint of, creating more equity in the justice system by essentially giving tools for attorneys to depose, incarcerated, people sooner. There's so many opportunities, I think, with technology right now that are people are, people have already thought through, have been talking about for years, but now it's kind of like when we need those solutions the most. So, certainly we see with remote work, people are spending a lot more time in video calls, are a lot more comfortable doing virtual consults. We need to give people time to be more efficient and focus time and break time between the meetings. So I think there's how do you orchestrate all of that? How do you think about the scenarios where before you had to invite 2 people to your brick and mortar or office, but now you can essentially create a virtual room for us all to get together and decide on something and move forward. We're working with partners to imagine a lot of the potential use cases here. We think about what are the needs before, during, after, kind of these events. remote work definitely means that you and I have to collaborate better, right? We have to be able to bring in people who are often on other platforms. So, like the technology, we're all going to continue to move our own technologies forward. We need to be able to interop with different platforms. We need to be able to um, leverage the fact that people are in other time zones to get work done by the time we are ready to work on something ourselves in the morning. And the tools are starting to do that. Definitely access to information, managing the permissions on that information, um, you know, doing the things that help the business operate more efficiently. Those are those are the things that we as a platform think are critical, because people have been spending way too much time thinking about the permissions on objects. People have been thinking way too much time about where something is being stored, and it takes away from their ability to really be better at their jobs, frankly. And I just want to know that I'm having a secure conversation and the right people are hearing, they're getting the data that's coming from me. I don't really need to worry about all that other stuff. So,
Right.
that's what I would say. I mean, the thing that I love about my job is helping companies think about those sort of next generation scenarios for their industry. That could be how like a buy and sell trader are interacting, on, like a more modern supply and demand marketplace. Um,
Hmm.
it could be how like a solo practitioner lawyer can quickly scale up a team of paralegals, other counsel, because they just got off a phone with a client who's got an amazing case, but they need, to create this virtual team very quickly and essentially swarm on this issue. Um, that's those are the really exciting things that we see, all of the technology, not just Teams, not just Office, but really folks like yourselves working on. And we know Teams can help people remain connected, and we know people can use it when they can't get to the office. But it's really about like, I think in this, as we move forward, like people are not just going to go back to the way things were before. They're going to expect um,
Yeah.
the speed of business to move a lot faster now at some level, because you can never really ever go back, right?
That's right. And maybe on that note, Stephen, I'm curious to conclude, and I've really enjoyed our conversation. One of the things we've talked about at Clio is with the COVID-19 crisis and the way it really transformed the world over the course of just a period of a few weeks. We fed our 2020 roadmap into the shredder and kind of rethought what we needed to be delivering to our customers, what kind of value we needed to be delivering to our customers that are operating in this new normal. And the Microsoft Teams integration was one of those roadmap items that we pulled well ahead of where it was on our roadmap prior to COVID-19. And I'm curious what your perspective is as it relates to the Microsoft Teams roadmap. Do you look at the Teams roadmap and the needs you need to be addressing in a new way, given the COVID-19 situation? And maybe do you have a broadened and expanded view of how Teams might get embraced in the average workplace, given the new reality we're operating in?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, my calendar. If you look at my calendar, every meeting begins with virtual this, virtual that, and the nature of working at a place like Microsoft is that an idea can come from anywhere. It can come from, a sales field person in, Italy that's looking for, that knows that, they've got 100 days left until back to school hits, and that students are going to be all logging into Teams, and they've got to deploy new software, and they've got to figure out, kind of like how they're going to bring courseware and content all into one place to bear
Right.
and so, like our roadmap really, I think got a lot condensed and much more tactical in terms of what, what are the segments of customers that are going to be impacted the soonest. And, we, initially we started looking at things like, well, how do we keep track of the inventory of ventilators? That was early on in COVID, and we knew that there was a limitation number of ventilators. Then it became, in education, is like, how do you help educators have a decent remaining left of this year? Students are at home, like 30 to 40% of them aren't tuning in. How do you engage them, not just in a meeting, but, in a whole pedagogical set of stuff that you want them to do, right? And so now, some of that is looking out, 3 months, 6 months, a little bit, but it's still very near term. And what we're, like we are very, very customer led in terms of our roadmap. So, customers are asking for different things that they can do on meetings, different ways they can access the data that comes out of meetings more programmatically through their apps. Oftentimes with virtual consults, there's a whole notion of qualifying the client before they're even in the consult with you. So what are some of the things that we can do before, during, and after, right? And, I'm very excited about the technology. There's, I know you've had on many people to talk about AI and legal, and those things will really very nicely, seamlessly integrate into teams over time as well, so that we can have a conversation and AI in the right places will be used, right? And I think so I'm excited about that. I'm excited about just kind of the value people are getting out of the conversations that are happening in teams, and the notion that you and I can almost use it as a creative surface, a place where we can come together, brainstorm ideas, come up with creative solutions, and then move those into even more structured working environments where now you have a set of things and I have a set of things. We're going to go off and develop on top of those, high level framework that we developed here. So yeah, it's going to be an exciting next 3 to 6 months. It's certainly not what we expected, but very but I'm personally excited every day to get out of bed and think about how we're helping our partners maximize the opportunity of having a integration side of teams more than we can do. So yeah,
I'm in the same boat. I'm excited and invigorated by the opportunity, and this opportunity to create the future that has just arrived a bit earlier than it might have otherwise. And I'm excited to see both where the Microsoft Team product goes over the coming months, and where our integration between Clio and Microsoft Teams heads as well. So, and I guess a call to action for any mutual customers that are listening to this. Do reach out to us, because we're listening, and both of our organizations are customer led, and we're listening to any feedback you might have about what you'd like to see next as well. So thanks so much for joining us today, Stephen. Really enjoyed our conversation, and look forward to.
It's been a real privilege to work with you and your team, and thank you for inviting me on your show.
Thanks for joining us on Daily Matters, a podcast from Clio. Rate and review wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Daily Matters is produced by Andrew Booth, Sam Rosenthal, and Derek Boland, and hosted by yours truly, Jack Newton. Thanks also to Clio, the world's leading cloud-based legal technology provider, for supporting this podcast.